Good afternoon, all my friends. For Wednesdays at 1, Wednesday at 1, it's our Bible study time. And we are going to be working on Exodus in the 16th chapter. So if you want to go ahead and grab your Bibles and whatever you're using to use as a marker, whether it's a Bible highlighter or a pencil or whatever, get your equipment and let's get started here today. Um, I would really, really appreciate it if you are watching, if you would either hit the like button or if you would just say good afternoon or check in somehow. If you can do that, I would really appreciate that, because I am going to be sending some information out to those of you who usually watch live. Now I see 3 people on here who have said hello, but it tells me that there are 9 people watching, which means there are a number of you out there who I don't know that you're watching, which is normally fine. But I would like you to identify yourselves simply because I am thinking about switching the format into a Zoom, which we can then simultaneously broadcast with the Facebook page, so nothing would change for those of you who watch on Facebook or on YouTube later. But the live people who watch me at 1 o'clock, if you would like to be included in the Zoom, if I can figure out, it's apparently possible for me to do a Zoom meeting and then for that to be live streamed onto Facebook at the same time, which would allow people to have conversation with me, which would be much more helpful than you having to type things on the scroll. So for those of you who would want to do the Zoom meeting part of it, it would just be like any other regular Zoom where you would see 6 or 7 of us on the screen. Um, and then if you want, or you can just see me, however you want to look at it. But then you can talk and I will hear your voice and we can have a conversation, which would be very nice. Lloyd says no. Well, you don't have to do the Zoom, but for the people who would like to have conversation with me instead of just typing questions or comments in the scroll, we could try doing a Zoom with just those of you who normally watch live, and and then we can have conversation, because I'm missing the conversation. I mean, there are a couple of you who continue to be good and to type in your questions, but there are a lot of people who are just listening in. So it'd be interesting for them to hear the conversation and the questions that somehow go. And I'm just trying to get this out of the story time with Pastor Susan mode into back to our original framework, which was to have some good conversation, questions and answers about what was going on. Pam goes, "Yay!" Yeah, I miss the conversation with you all. So if I can figure out how to do it, apparently it's easy to do. And as I say, those of you who are watching on Facebook would watch the same way you always do. But if you wanted to get in on the conversation, you could come in through the Zoom meeting. So I will send out information if you are interested in that, or if not, I'll just send it out to the regular those folks who are regularly doing this and conversing with me. I'll just try to figure out. Hope I don't miss anybody, but we'll find out. If I get that working for next week, we'll hit it and rock and roll. So, welcome in to Wednesday at 1. We are moving along in the book of Exodus, and let us take this moment on this momentous day. I have on my Declaration of Independence T-shirt, which I don't have a Constitution T-shirt, but that'll be my next purchase. But anyway, quite the moving and just a morning. The inauguration and all of the activities around the inauguration were quite different than normal, partially because of the pandemic, but then also partially because of the threats against the Capitol and the lockdown of the area. But it was quite moving to me. So many of the speeches were about unity and getting back to truth and caring for one another, and that just makes my pastor's heart feel very good about where we're going. Um, at the same time knowing that there are a lot of people out there who are confused and hurting and disappointed. And so we keep all of us in prayer. But just my personal response is that it feels good to get back on the footing of people of faith. You know, that people of faith and trying to live out Christian principles in their daily life. Um, it just sounds better to have people who speak in terms of faith to me. So anyway, if that's yours, then it's a good day for you. And if that is not where you're coming from, then I'm sorry about your disappointment, and I will try always not to keep people from feeling like they can be part of this conversation, because all of these comments are good. And welcome in, Melissa. Okay, so if you're watching this later in the day, I would ask that you would at some point post either like this page or like this on the scroll, or just check in and say, I was here. If you want to give the time that you came in, that would be helpful. Because I'm looking to kind of see if we can't change up the format a little bit and add in a part of the live stream would be a Zoom portion. But don't worry, you'll always be able to watch it on Facebook or however you watch it now. It just might change what you see a little bit. Okay, so let us pray. Gracious God, our topic today is the 16th chapter of Exodus, and the headline on that is Bread from Heaven. You have always fed us with your love, and sometimes even with real bread, manna that falls from the heaven that we have nothing to do with except to receive. You feed us from the table of bread and wine, again, that we have nothing to do with but to receive. And so today we ask that we try to keep out of the way of what we might receive today in your word, as we read together and think about what was going on so many, many years ago as the people of Israel escaped from their slavery in Egypt and wandered in the wilderness before finally reaching the promised land. Many of us are in different stages today. Some of us feel like we're in the wilderness. Some of us feel like we're on the edge of the forest of the promised land. But Lord, wherever we are in our journeys, we know that you are right by our side. And so we thank you for your companionship. We thank you for your presence in our study and in your word. And we thank you most especially for sending your son Jesus to show us how to live our lives and how to love you, which we do. And we thank you for being present with us this day. All these things we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are starting out. I'm going to be starting out with Exodus chapter 16, and I want to just have you note, if you do not have notes in your Bible, or if you don't have any indication. Again, I'm not using the Lutheran Study Bible today. I've got a different version, still the same text, but different notes and commentary. But if you don't have notes in there from Lutheran Study Bible or whatever you've got, this is a parallel. This part of the story is paralleled in the book of Numbers, in Numbers chapter 9 through 11, 12, around in there. And again, probably talking about a different strand of authorship. So there was a different kind of purpose for the story to be retold and collected into the book of Numbers, which, because of the title, you get the gist. Numbers is all about the numbers, how many people in the tribes, and how many people moved, and how many people settled, and what the numbers were of the people of Israel as they moved from Egypt into the promised land over that 50-year span. But there is kind of a parallel or a duplication of this part of the story in Numbers 9 through 11. So if that intrigues you and you like to maybe compare and contrast, you could get two separate Bibles and open one to 16 in Exodus and one to 9. Actually, I think at 9 it starts in the Passover. So you might just read through that and then come back to Exodus, or however you might want to compare and contrast. But just kind of interesting. We probably will not be working through Numbers. So that might be something that you might want to do on your own time, just to kind of see what you can see from the different authors about this particular part of the story. So I'm going to read a little bit, and then and then I'll tell you thoughts on the story. So this is Exodus chapter 16, beginning at the first verse. The whole congregation of the Israelites set out from Elim, and Israel came to the wilderness of Shin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way I will test them, whether they will follow my instruction or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they will bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on other days." Excuse me. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain to us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening, and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against him, what are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, 'Draw near to the Lord, for he has heard your complaining.'" And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, 'At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God.'" In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you needs, an omer to a person according to the number of persons, all providing for those in their own tent." The Israelites did so, some gathering more, some less. But when they measured it with an omer, those who gathered much had nothing over, and those who gathered little had no shortage. They gathered as much as each of them needed. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they did not listen to Moses. Some left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul. And Moses was angry with them. Morning by morning they gathered it, as much as each needed. And when the sun grew hot, it melted. On the sixth day, they gathered twice as much food, 2 omers apiece. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of rest, a solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you want to bake, and boil what you want to boil, and all that is left over put aside to be kept until morning." So they put it aside until morning, as Moses commanded them. And it did not become foul, and there were no worms in it. Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is a Sabbath, there will be none. On the seventh day, some of the people went out to gather, and they found none. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commandments and instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you food for 2 days. Each of you stay where you are. Do not leave your place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. The house of Israel called it manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer of it be kept throughout your generations, in order that they may see the food with which I fed you in the wilderness, when I brought you out of the land of Egypt." And Moses said to Aaron, "Take a jar and put an omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations." As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the covenant for safekeeping. The Israelites ate manna 40 years until they came to a habitable land. They ate manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. An omer is the tenth of an ephah. That's helpful, right? Okay, so they ate manna for 40 years. Let's see, let me just. Okay, just a couple of comments I wanted to make, and hopefully, if you found uh, a map in the back of your Bible that has the wanderings in the wilderness, you will have seen. And I'll try once again today. I think this worked kind of all right last time. Mount Sinai. Let me get a thing here. Okay, Mount Sinai is down here. Okay, here's Egypt over here. So they left. We're going around the red route. Okay, went down here, and today we started in Elim. I don't know if you can see that. Elim. Okay, and they're traveling down through the wilderness of Sin down to they're on their way down to Mount Sinai, which is the bottom part of the Sinai Peninsula. Okay, so you probably have a similar map in the back of your Bible, but basically we're going south along kind of right now. Elim was not too far from the coast. So they're following a path along the coast, along the edge of the Red Sea, and when they move into the wilderness of Sin, then they're gonna go through some high desert and some of the desert that takes you down to Mount Sinai, which is right at the point at the southernmost point of the Sinai Peninsula. So just geographically get that into your head. That's kind of how that unfolds. So they leave out of Elim, and they seem to have been stopping quite a bit. Remember last time we talked, they were, they made it through the sea, they danced, they were, jumping around and singing songs and hymns and having all kinds of celebrations. And then they get out, setting out on their journey, and the first thing they find is that they can't find any potable water. The water is bitter. So there's right off the bat, there's another miracle. First, they've gotten through the sea safely, but then the water is no good. So then Moses hits with Aaron's staff, and the water becomes sweet. So then now they have water is provided for them. So the first thing God has done for them is to get them out of slavery. Immediately they cry out for water, and God provides water that they can drink that will support them. When they go on a little bit further, they camp out again, perhaps a couple of days, maybe a week, that they've been traveling without food, unless they had brought food with them, which some people say they probably had packed up some food, because that's where we get the Passover story. The other story there, you know, they don't talk about that at all, but in the Passover story, in that strand, we talk about how they didn't have time to let the bread rise, but one would have supposed they would have baked the bread without it having risen, so that they would have had some kind of larder with them, just not a lot. So they had enough to get through this first week just with water or with whatever they had brought with them. But now they've been traveling for a while, and now it's getting more and more important that they find some source of food, because they're out in the desert. So they're complaining, and it's not. There's none of this. Let's send a delegation to talk to Moses and say, Moses, did you think about what we were going to eat? I mean, is there Hardee's down the way, or what are we going to do here? How are we going to provide for ourselves as we move into this wilderness? But instead of that, instead of going to Moses and saying, is there a plan? What are we supposed to do? Um, they complain. They're just griping the whole time. And it's like, how long does it take for people to have what they say they need before they start complaining that it isn't enough? And I thought, man, that is really, here we are. Welcome to humanity. Um, just as soon as we get what we think we wanted, then it's not enough, and we have to complain to have some more. Me, I'm having a little little hoarseness these days. Okay, so they complain to Moses. Moses talks to God. God says, "Okay, here's what we're going to do, and I will use this as a test." Now, here's another kind of commentary or interpretive tool that you can use. When something comes to you that you read, and you're kind of like, this idea of God testing people doesn't square with what I read in the New Testament. So I'm going to look at that and say, I'm going to just question it. I'm going to see, you know, how can I look at that so it's not just God, you know, without just kind of helter skelter saying, I know today I'll test them, I'll see how good they are at the obedience thing. Instead of that, let's think of this about, we've got people who are retelling this story, and they know that obviously God is going to provide food here for the travelers. But then they, looking back, say, and this was a test that came from God, whether God intended it to be a test or whether it just was a test that they're going to have to learn how to trust God is a matter of interpretation. Okay, so you could make a case that this was God saying, I'm going to test these people and see, but God also knew that they were going to need to be provided for. So it wasn't just a serendipitous God sitting on a cloud saying, what will we do today? Let's just test the people and see what they do. It's not like a rat maze. Personally, I would prefer to think that this is kind of the way people began to understand what God's, this relationship with God is causing them to figure things out, okay, to learn from God how to be in relationship with God. So this is kind of a teaching time. And we're going to see a similar kind of teaching time for Jesus in the wilderness. And there we talk about it as temptation, which again is a human kind of thing, or testing. We do use the same word as testing, but it's not testing like I'm going to test you to the point where you fail and I laugh. It's more testing as in learning. I'm going to put an opportunity in front of you for you to be able to learn how to do this better, or how to rely on me, or how to trust, or how to whatever. So these are kind of, I like to think of these as wilderness learnings, okay? And maybe that softens it a little bit too much, but does God send us learnings? Probably. I think life sends us learnings, and God is there with us to encourage us and to love us and to help us learn how to respond to these things that just land in front of us. And it's God's desire that we will learn, and that we will trust, and that we will further the relationship. So anyway, that's just that's an example of interpretation, not trying to say this is what this means or this is what this doesn't mean, but just kind of sometimes our words send us off in a different direction than I think was intended. Um, and that's why it's the inspired word of God. We have, you can interpret this for yourself. You can take this and say, no, I think God tests us. I think God sends things to us to make us better, to make us stronger, to help us learn. Um, or, as I would say, I think that's what the world does, and God is companioning us, um, and encouraging us and giving us the strength and the different eyes to see. If you have ears to hear, if you have eyes to see, you will learn something, having been put in this situation. Um, so this, let's see, what they will do and how they will follow the directions. Okay, let's think about it in those terms. Um, and again, for the people of Israel, Jewish ethnicity have always been, seekers of knowledge. Okay, so that's something that we talk about. I mean, as far as an ethnicity, some things, there are certain ethnicities that have capabilities that seem to be better suited to that ethnic cultural upbringing, whatever. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not, but I don't want to look at that stereotypically, but there does seem to be over centuries, that the Jewish people have this, um, I can't think of the word I want, this desire to continue education, to continue to learn, and to continue to grow. And so here we're starting some of that. And this is going to be the learning time in the wilderness. So God says to Moses, here's the deal. I'm gonna give you quail at night, and I'm going to give you manna in the morning. So there will be meat and there will be bread, and obviously now, and water. So you have what you're going to need to sustain yourselves in the wilderness. And you don't have to do anything for it, but to just gather the amount that is necessary. So don't hoard it. Don't try to leave, don't try to be a martyr and only take a little bit. And take what you need. Take what you need for the people in your tent, in your household. Take what you need, and no more. And then, and it'll measure out to be about an omer, which is a part of an ephah, which now you know exactly how much that was. You can look that one up if you want. um, but so the deal was, no matter how much they gathered, it measured to be an omer. Okay, and if they didn't need a whole omer, and they tried to keep it till the next day, it would rot. To the point where, some people did that. They found out that the maggots got into it, and so it wasn't good. It didn't last for the next day. And then it basically says, after the morning gathering, um, anything that was left out in the field would melt. So there was no more. You would gather what God had provided, and you would use it to feed your family, and then you would wait for the next day, to gather it again. Then in the evening there would be quail in a similar situation. So the point was not, I'm going to gather up all I can so I don't have to, worry. It's just, this is a trusting thing that God provides the food for the day, okay, and just the food for the day. So give us this day our daily bread, okay, a little bit at a time, and each day then I trust that it will come again the next day, with the exception of on the sixth day. On the sixth day, there will be enough so that everyone could gather double. And this time, the double gathering will not, um, perish or melt or get old and have maggots in it. It will remain for the second day, so that you do not have to work on the second day. Thank you, Pam. An ephah is a bushel, so an omer is a tenth of a bushel. So think about that. So you get, like a loaf of bread. You get enough to, a good hunk of bread for whoever you're feeding in your household. Thank you, my resource person. Um, so, but the funny thing is here, Moses, first of all, say this is what's going to happen. You do this, and they do it, and the ones who don't do it find out it doesn't. Their system doesn't work. That you got to do it the way God has created the system of distribution. Then Moses says, "Okay, now I want you to gather double on the sixth day, so that you have enough for the seventh day. And I can imagine them all kind of going, now, wait a minute, you just told us we couldn't keep it, and now you're telling us you want us to keep it. And, so there's all this, see, all these things where that, if you just trust, everything comes. If you don't trust, then you get yourself all worried and you get yourself all fret up, and it doesn't come to anything. So the point of gathering twice, that God would allow 2 days worth to last for 2 days, only happened on the sixth and seventh day for the purposes of allowing them to rest on the seventh day. These people were traveling through the desert, hard travel. So they needed a day to just stay in their tents and to rest and to enjoy their families and to, talk and tell stories and make relationships and do all those things that folks do, because there wasn't a whole lot of other stuff going on. So the Sabbath then became the Lord's Day. And here again, we see the echoes of the priestly account that are making sure that the Sabbath law that came in the telling of creation of the days, so that the seventh day God rested, on the seventh day you rest. Doesn't matter the circumstance, you rest on the seventh day, because that's the order of creation. That's what God intended. But it's like God almost had to force them. Some of them went out on the seventh day to try to gather, and there wasn't any manna to be found. So it's almost like, see, I told you, do here's what's going to happen, and here's how you respond to what's going to happen. It's not only a lesson in trust, it is a lesson in surrender to something other than your own control, which really, in essence, obviously is trust. So the final little piece of this chapter that I think is really wonderful is that idea that to take an omer of the manna in a container that will be kept to show future generations what it was about. Now you're thinking, well, future generations, I mean, I can't keep it overnight. Why would, how could, but somehow it was brought to the covenant, which is this is the place where they had these things that were part of their holy things. They haven't started carrying things, making an ark yet, but they've started to gather these things that had to do with the treaty or the promise or whatever. So this was a place of testimony. So wherever it was that they gathered, they brought this container, and this container was to travel with them for the purposes of education, not for feeding, but just so that people in the future would be able to see how they had sustained themselves in the wilderness. So that's kind of a cool thing. And then we find out this wonderful thing about that the omer is a tenth of an ephah. And now you know what that means too, because Pam told us. Thank you, Pam. Okay, I don't see any questions here. You all are just hanging on my every interpretation. So, so I want to go ahead and let's go ahead and I will read 17. We'll see if we can, how far we can get today. From the wilderness of Sin, the whole congregation of the Israelites journeyed by stages as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried out to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Go on ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it so that the people may drink." Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Okay, so it is unclear now that when they first got the water that was bitter and it was made sweet, were they one would assume that they were traveling and they would be taking water with them. So either the water has run out from that first place and we have to continue to do this. Um, but the point I think here is that every time they had a need, God responds using Moses. They come and complain to Moses. Moses talks to God. God responds to their needs. So part of this, I think, is the learning of not only trusting that God will provide, but the way that we get God to provide is by asking. They apparently weren't asking nicely, but the idea is that God, even though God knows what you need, there is an involvement by you in, requesting or praying for, or these are reflections and petitions, that things that you need, that you want to bring to God's attention. So here we're learning something else. We've learned that God is faithful, that God can be trusted. When God says this will happen, then things happen the way God tells them. And now we're seeing this learning of this idea of petitioning God for your needs. Moses is in the place of the intercessor. So it's not people crying out directly to God, but to going to Moses. So they are recognizing his leadership, and they're recognizing the role that they have in the community and how the community is going to form and work. Okay, at verse 8. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some men for us and go out and fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." So Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek, while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side, so his hands were steady until the sun set. And Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the sword. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Write this as a reminder in a book and recite it in the hearing of Joshua. I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. The Lord is my banner." And Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." He said, "The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." Okay, so here comes Amalek. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing because you're kind of wondering, okay, so there's people out in the wilderness. I think always when I have thought about them wandering in the wilderness, I never thought that they were going to be running into other people in the wilderness. So, were they running into, I don't know, people on trade routes? Were they running into people who lived in the wilderness? Was Amalek on his way from one place to another and they happened upon him? We don't really have any idea here, because all of a sudden, as they're wandering along, drinking water that they have just gotten from a rock, here comes Amalek. So, what are we going to learn from this particular incident in the wilderness? That there are other people out there in the wilderness, people who would take from them whatever they have. And Moses becomes now, this is the challenge of the day. I mean, he's met the challenge of water, he's met the challenge of bread and of meat, and of getting them out of slavery. God has used him for all of these challenges. But now we have a new challenge, and this is that he will send Joshua and some of his men out to fight on the edges to keep the people safe, so that Joshua will become the leader of this group who will go out to fight Amalek. However, it's not just like go out there and wage war, and when you're done, come home. Moses himself is going to oversee this battle. And he says, as long as he's holding up the staff, they will prevail. And then when his arm got tired, basically, I mean, it wasn't like he said, okay, you're winning. Oh, sorry, now you're not winning. Okay, you're winning. He would hold up the staff, but his arm would get tired. And when he started to flag in his duty, then the tide would turn in the battle. So we have this wonderful image. In fact, for those of you all have been in the library, when you first walk into the library, directly in front of you is that kind of yellowish, mustard seedy kind of um, portrait of, and this is what it depicts. It's Moses with Aaron and Hur on either side of him, holding up his arms so he can hold the staff up high. And if you want to start to red flag some of these pictures and images in your head for future use, you've got Moses with his arms up, with his arms up, holding his arms up, and two members of his community holding his arms up, sort of like Jesus on the cross. So we have, and at the foot of the cross, we have soldiers. We have people, both disciples and soldiers, who are on either side of him, lifting him up, both with their belief and with their prayers. On either side. So there's kind of it's not a perfect image, but you have these images of, especially in the language, he held up his hands, one on one side and the other on the other side. So his hands were steady until the sun set. And in that image, we also have Joshua defeating Amalek and his people with the sword when the sun sets. Genesis 7 talks about Amalekites as tribal peoples living in the Sinai Peninsula. Thank you. Okay, so the Amalekites, the Amalekites, obviously tribal people living in the Sinai Peninsula. So basically, Moses and the Israelites were, pounded into their territory, so they were defending their area. And yet they prevail. So, but this is not a kind of, we're looking for land or we're wanting to, they're just passing through. So God protects them here. And it says that Amalek was from an Edomite tribe and dwelled in the Negev, or in the Sinai Peninsula. Okay, Joshua was Moses' field commander, and we will see that then when they reach the promised land, and Joshua and Caleb will go in to reconnoiter the neighborhood and see what's going on, and that will not go well. So we'll get there. Not too many pages. Okay, so the remembering. Also, I think we've talked about this before. The word remember. When you remember, in the Hebrew understanding of remembering, it's as if you bring the past back into the present, so that when you remember someone, they are then with you in this present moment. So to blot out the remembrance of Amalek and the people, Moses says, this defeat is past us. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to remember it. It's nothing to us now as we move forward on our journey. So don't make a big deal about holding, having revenge or holding any bad feelings about the Amalekites. That will happen later, but right now it's like, move on. Okay, so after the sun sets, and we have this idea that that Moses is told by God to write this as a reminder in a book and recite it in the hearing of Joshua. So he wants Moses to tell the story to Joshua. So Joshua has this story in his background. And because he is the soldier, he's the one that Moses passes this on, that he builds an altar, and he calls it, the Lord is my banner. In other words, the Lord is the one who gives us the victory. And he said, a hand upon the banner of the Lord. And the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. The Lord will have war. But the remembrance of Amalek will be blotted out from under heaven. So for those of us under heaven, we're not going to remember that. Okay. But God and Amalek will do this reckoning between. So he gives it to God to reckon with Amalek. Okay. So let's see what we got here. Let me go ahead and read. We're going to have a little transition here for a minute. So this is chapter 18. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro took her back, along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been an alien in a foreign land. And the name of the other, Eleazar, for he said, the God of my father was my help, and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came into the wilderness where Moses was encamped at the mountain of God, bringing Moses' sons and wife to him. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare, and they went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had beset them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the Egyptians. Jethro said, Blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because he delivered the people from the Egyptians when they dealt arrogantly with them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. The next day, Moses sat as judge for the people, while the people stood around him from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for all the people, he said, What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone while all the people stand around you from morning until evening? Moses said to his father-in-law, Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known to them the statutes and instructions of God. Moses' father-in-law said to him, What you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone. Now listen to me, and I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You should represent the people before God, and you should bring their cases before God. Teach them the statutes and instructions, and make known to them the way they are to go and the things they are to do. You should also look for able men among all the people, men who fear God, are trustworthy, and hate dishonest gain. Set such men over them as officers, over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them sit as judges for the people at all times. Let them bring every important case to you, but decide every minor case themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will go to their home in peace. So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men from all Israel and appointed them as heads over the people, as officers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And they judged the people at all times. Hard cases they brought to Moses, but any minor case they decided themselves. Then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went off to his own country. Okay, so here's another kind of a surprising thing. We have Jethro, the priest of Midian, who is Zipporah's, Moses' wife's father. Okay, so the father-in-law hears of what God has done for Moses and for the people. He hears that escaped from slavery, how the Lord has brought them out of Egypt, and then and apparently at some point Moses had sent his wife Zipporah, and she went back to Jethro, and Jethro took her back. So we don't I don't believe we have that story here in Exodus, but apparently that is a point at which, when things were getting so bad in Egypt, he sent her away, and then they went, and so she went back to Midian to live with Jethro. Now let me look, if you got your map handy, let me just show you once again. Let me get this now out of the sunlight. Okay, so we have here. See, if we were doing this by Zoom, I could share my screen. Okay, so we went down to Rephidim, and we're on our way to Mount Sinai. But if you look, right across the Gulf of Aqaba is Midian. So around in there is where Jethro would have lived, and that's where Zipporah and Moses' kids were. So, and that's where Zipporah had come from. So Jethro, it wasn't hard for him to travel to them. Now, how he found them, we don't know. But there again, this was a trade route, or there was ways to get news to people. The people of Israel had been traveling probably a little over a month now, and so Jethro sent out, people to find them. I don't know. But anyway, at some point, he comes to where they are in the wilderness, which is, again, kind of one of those things like, wait a minute, there are people in the wilderness that they're going to have to fight with, and they get visitors in the wilderness. I mean, these are stories that we don't hear in Sunday school. So kind of fun to have this. And then while he's there, Jethro shares with Moses this advice. And of course, as a father in law who cares about his daughter and her children and the father of her children, he's like, Moses, you can't do this all yourself. You need some help here. So let me make a suggestion. And he basically sets up the court system. So you got your district courts, you got your circuit courts, you got your federal courts, and you got the Supreme Court, which is Moses. So he suggests this structure, which, part of me is saying that Moses also knew that people were bored. They're traveling. They do. I mean, traveling in the wilderness, as I say, was probably full-time work. You're setting up your tent, you're taking down your tent, you're making sure you've got stuff, whatever, you're making sure all your people are with you, so it wasn't that they were just laying around somewhere in the wilderness. However, you can imagine, after wandering and thinking about what they had work and meaning, and something to fight for when they were in Egypt, and now they're just wandering. They think they're going to the promised land, but in the meantime, what are you doing to help out your neighbor today? So this idea, I can imagine, was pretty well received by the trustworthy and faithful men who were appointed to do this kind of work within the people. And knowing people the way I do, there was probably never an empty docket as far as people wanting to come and have their problems resolved by someone outside of themselves. So that is where we're going to stop for today. Next week, we're going to arrive at Mount Sinai, and of course you know that Mount Sinai is the location at which Moses will receive the Ten Commandments. So this is where we will start on the 27th, next Wednesday, and we'll start talking about how they started to govern themselves. And isn't it a perfect time to talk about governing and how that should happen when it comes from God? So, not saying that this one came from God, but we do believe that our leadership comes, that if the leadership is willing to serve God, then God can use the leadership. So anyway, so that's where we are today, and I hope that you learned something, at least got a little bit of perspective on the wilderness traveling. I don't know that we ever really get that big picture. We hear, they leave, they get through the Red Sea, they get manna, they get the Ten Commandments. They start their all kinds of craziness stuff going on, and then they arrive at the Promised Land. It's kind of like we get those little kind of postcards from the journey. It's like, today we got water out of a rock. Woohoo! Today we fought the Amalekites. So these are the signposts on this journey that we're taking with the people of Israel. Hope you have a good afternoon this evening. I'm sure there will be some wonderful historical things to watch as the day's events are reported and unfold, and we move to tomorrow. So I will see some of you tomorrow morning or throughout the day with the devotions, and then again on Sunday. So have a blessed day. It looks really pretty outside. If you don't mind the wind, go and take a walk. And I will see you soon. God bless. Bye bye.